Hey guys, it's another Saturday, and I am uh, thinking about sharing with you things about fear. You know, it's said that we either act out of love or out of fear. When we act out of fear, it's often our ego, and the ego is really concerned with our survival, with our reputation in the community, with all kinds of things. But it's a very staunch ally of your physical body. And so I went back over my life and I thought about some of the things I was afraid of, which included spiders. When I was 12 years old, I was brushing out my hair in front of a dresser. It was a tall dresser and it had a mirror, and this spider fell out. It must have been in my hair during part of the night, and it just scared the bejesus out of me. I don't know why. I had not had a spider phobia up to that point. But I left that room, ran through the kitchen, got into my parents' room, they weren't home, and sat on the bed, huddled on the bed, and had closed two doors between me and the bedroom where the spider was. And darned if that spider didn't come through underneath both doors and try to get to me. It must have had a happy home or something. Maybe it had just laid some, I don't know, do they lay eggs? I guess they lay eggs. Anyway, that spider just spooked me so badly. And I picked up one of my father's shoes and threw it at the spider and killed it. And that was the beginning of my quite adversarial relationship with spiders going forward. Even as recently as last year, I was bitten by a brown recluse. This is the third time I've been bitten by one of them in the last 10 years. And every time they pick soft tissue while I'm asleep, and it leaves a big ugly boil about this big, deep purple boil, and you can kind of get it, squeeze out the stuff that's the deep purple. But for many, many years, my attitude towards spiders was the only good spider is a dead spider. And I think the spiders pick up my attitude even when I'm asleep and not directing it at them at the moment. So I have started to try to reform my attitude towards spiders. And this year I have probably escorted 6 of them out the door. If they let me grab them with a tissue, get a hold of them and take them outside, I do that. If they start to scurry all over the place, they usually still end up being dead. So I have not completely alleviated my fear of spiders. It's a phobia, but it's good to work on things that you're afraid of, which took me back to when I bought a boat. I had bought a 28-foot sailboat, and I was afraid to take the boat away from its slip. I was living on the boat in Panama City, Florida, and day after day went by with me not having the courage to untie the lines and take that boat out sailing. And I had a boat many years earlier, a smaller one, which I had no qualms taking out. But then I wasn't in a marina. There were no other boats that I could cash into nearby. It had a little outboard engine instead of this diesel monster that this 28-footer came with. And it wasn't until I took ASA sailing classes and had a captain with me a few times taking it out and putting it back in that I finally cranked up the courage to actually go out sailing with this boat on my son's birthday that year. But the feeling of fear, day after day, is this the day I'm going to take this boat out? And another day goes by because I can think of all things I should be doing instead, like changing the settee cover, taking out the bed and turning the dining room back over there, figuring out what size dinghy I needed. I mean, I could always come up with something to excuse why I hadn't taken the boat out yet. But fear is not a good thing. And when I think about that particular fear, I realize it had to do with not wanting to look bad to begin with, not wanting to crash my boat into other people's boats, which would have caused property damage. So those two things. And there are so many others. When I was in high school, I refused to attend my own graduation because I was terrified of being seen by that many people. I had been the art editor at Julia Richmond, and I had to get up on the stage. It was a huge school. It took up the entire city block with an enormous auditorium, and I didn't know why at the time, but I was absolutely terrified of having to go on the stage by myself to receive that art award for our high school literary art magazine that I had worked on. And so I made up an excuse, and I told the people rehearsing us for that day that my parents were taking me to Hawaii, and I wouldn't be able to be there. And so it wasn't until some years later that I discovered Fritz, this other being that I was in another life. And he had spent a year of his life in a courtroom with hundreds of eyes on him and the other Nazis in the dock. It wasn't just me, there were like 20 others. And then at the end of that year of being watched, he was hung. And so time really isn't linear the way we think of it. And these lives are going on simultaneously, so I can still feel that energy of what's happening with him. He was also responsible for getting me sailing because he was a sailor. But I didn't know that when I bought my first boat. I just wanted to go sail. Suddenly I had to have a boat. And it was Fritz. So fear makes us, it paralyzes us. This particular week, I did have one lovely day, and that was Monday. I get to meet Jamie Raskin. He's a congressman, and I just absolutely think the world of him for his goodness, his decency, his intelligence, his courage. He's an idol for me. And he was in New Mexico in Albuquerque, and so I had the opportunity, along with I think there were 25 of us, having lunch with him that day. And that was a real pleasure for me. I just really like this guy very, very much. And he has written a couple of books if you're interested in politics. His books are really, really good, and they're very interesting, and I think they're probably also on audio. So on Tuesday, I woke up to the news that Iran had sent missiles into Israel, and it is such a place of terror right now, terror and unhappiness, but it's frightening when you think about it. And what do you do with that fear when the fear starts happening and you start expanding on it? Oh my God, next this is going to happen, and we can just imagine the chain reactions that can come out of this. And it causes us to want to go and buy toilet paper. I mean, and do other things over here. But like all of the other fears that I have gone through in my life, I realized that most of the fear comes from my thoughts. It's what do I think is going to happen here? And then project that into a worst case scenario. And that can be very scary. So what do we do about that? Well, in my case, I allowed myself to just sink into that feeling for a little while, the terror of that, and then realized, I really am an adherent of the Seth, S-E-T-H material, and he maintains that there are no victims, that we draw events into our lives because we need the experiences, that there's always a good reason for the things that happen in our lives. And you might think that's ridiculous that there are no victims, how about innocent children? But innocent children have also lived thousands of lifetimes, so they come with that inbuilt memory as well, and what their need is for that particular life, which may include getting some of what they gave out in an adjacent parallel life. We keep taking different sides. Many of us have not yet had the experience of seeing ourselves in another lifetime, let alone a really horrible lifetime. And when that happens, it's not an easy thing to carry along with you. It's not a joyful thing. It's like, oh my God, could I possibly have done that? But we all have, and we just don't know it yet, which may be a savings grace for many of us, because it's not an easy thing to carry around with you. But if you don't know that you're also playing the role of the bad guys in some other life simultaneously, you tend to have a very lopsided view of reality. Like, you're superior, you're much better, you would never have done anything like that. You can't possibly put yourself in the shoes of the other person unless you know that you've been that other person. And so my knowledge of that other life is really a mixed blessing. On the other hand, when you get right down to the bottom of most fears, they have to do with fear of death. And if you know that you have had many, many other lifetimes, that fear is just simply not as prevalent. So one of the things that I do is I remember other lifetimes, and then I lose some of that fear and dread of what's coming next. And after I have allowed myself to experience that, I then deliberately shift my focus to something uplifting and enjoyable. And for me, that's often music. I listen to music a lot, and it really does wonders for me in terms of lifting me up. But you don't want to let yourself get too deeply into your fears. You really want to be able to catch yourself at some point and shift the focus, because what you fear you bring to yourself. So you want to be able to release and let go. Alright, this is a really long message, and I don't know whether it'll post to Facebook because it's really long. Hope you guys have a good rest of your Saturday. Ciao.